Okay, what should companies do? Well, the thing that the Act suggests you do is put in place an adequate procedure. That, remember, is your defence against this corporate liability for bribery. But what is an adequate procedure? We can all design a procedure. How do we know if it's adequate? Who can help? And will the government tell you how to do it? Well, first off, I can say the government won't help you how to do it. The guidance will come out, and I think it will give as much comfort as possible by giving scenarios and case studies and using words like reasonable and proportionate and so on, because the intent is not to punish honest businesses doing normal business. The intent is to catch those who are bribe paying. So the government will try to help, but the Act is the Act, and whatever the government comes out with in its guidance, it can't contradict or override the Act. That is what has been passed by Parliament, and so in the end, the Act is what the Serious Fraud Office would need to bear in mind when they take a prosecution, and what judges would bear in mind when they're making assessments about whether the Act applies. So the government guidance will be useful, but don't absolutely rely on it. You need to think it through for yourselves. Most guidance around, there are various sets of guidance already. Transparency International produces one, and I'll talk about that in a minute. There are various law firms that produce them. There was the draft government guidance that came out in November, and the new one will come out soonish. Basically, they're all structured around 6 basic principles, and these are the principles. I won't talk about them in detail now because there isn't that time, but they effectively take a sort of management systems approach that would be common in other areas like health and safety management, environmental management, and so on. Tone from the top, risk assessment, detailed policies and procedures, the implementation. Due diligence in particular is emphasized in the bribery sphere, which may not be in other areas like environmental management or health and safety. Due diligence, particularly on third parties and agents. And the reason for that is because a lot of bribery has sort of been pushed off to third parties. If you're a company wanting to pay a bribe, then you probably realize it's not very sensible to do it yourself now. So you try and get your agent or your intermediary to pay the bribe on your behalf, thinking that will distance you. That is now caught under the law by this phrase, associated persons. And for that reason, the adequate procedure that you might put in place is making sure you do a pretty good due diligence on who your associated persons are when you're appointing an agent or an intermediary to make sure they're not going to pay bribes on your behalf. And monitoring your review, again, sort of a basic thing. So these 6 principles, phrased slightly differently, ordered slightly differently, are basically the 6 principles of an adequate procedure. Well, they start off with the need to have a policy in place, and I would say that immediately you should, in your companies, have a policy in place saying and meaning, we do not pay bribes, we do not tolerate bribe paying in any form in this company. And if you want an off-the-shelf set of policies, you can get those. There are 3 really around in the international space: the business principles for counting bribery, the World Economic Forum's patchy principles, and the ICC principles. So if you want to take an off-the-shelf set of principles and have them to show your clients or have them internally, these are probably what you take and then slightly adapt to your own business. And then adequate procedures. Well, as I said, TI, my organisation, has produced some. Ours, I don't want to intimidate you, ours is produced for more or less FTSE 350 size companies. It's about 200 pages, and it has a 231-point checklist. I don't imagine that any company, including a FTSE 350, is going to be able to tick all 231 points on that checklist. But it's a guide as to what is a pretty robust procedure. We're working with a group, including the Federation of Small Businesses and some others, to try and produce a version for SMEs, which may be more appropriate for your size business. But really, I think the thing to note here is that whether it's from TI or elsewhere, there is a lot of guidance out there. In fact, in a sense, perhaps too much. And I think the challenge is to try and get the good stuff and assimilate it and make it relevant and proportionate to your business. But as I said, today is a starting point, I think, in that journey, that it is going to take some work doing that. And I know it's always a pain to put into place new procedures and so on. But if you think there's any risk that you might be running foul of the new law, or your employees might, or you might be accused of it, then having an adequate procedure in place is that legal defence against corporate liability. We also, by the way, just to make it easier, produce a 20-point checklist, an anti-bribery and corruption checklist. It's on our website if you want to look for it. It's a cut-down version of that 231 points. We call it the board members' airport checklist. As I mentioned under section 14, directors can be personally liable if they get it wrong or if their company gets it wrong. So if they want to sit down in an idle 10 minutes at an airport and check through to make sure that their company has this, that can be used. And I think it can be used also by SMEs, just as a starting point. Okay, 5 things you could do immediately. First of all, make sure the board is engaged. I don't know what kind of board structures you will have in your companies, but the people at the top of your company need to know that this is really important new legislation and potentially has quite an impact on their business in all sorts of ways, and we'll explore that. Put into place a zero-tolerance policy. Analyse the risks. You know, if you're operating solely within the UK, your risks are going to be much lower than if you're operating in Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Tunisia, for example. Not to pick on those countries, but clearly the corruption risk is higher in some countries than others, and the research shows that quite evidently. But bribery is also prosecutable in the UK, so if the structure of your business means that by the nature of gifts and hospitality and commissions and so on, that they might actually be bribes, then be pretty careful about those in the UK. Start putting into place a proper system. Now, you can't magic a system out of nowhere, and you can't take my 20-point checklist and put it on the notice board in the kitchen and say, okay, that's our procedure, can everybody read it? That is not a proper procedure. So it will take time to put something into place. You know, I don't know the size of your businesses, and for a very small businesses, perhaps 2 or 3 people, it's going to be very, very different to a business of 50 people or a business of 1,000 people. So you need to find something that is proportionate to you, but you need some kind of system if you think your exposure or your risk exposure to bribery it merits it. And also, I would say, document everything. That if the Serious Fraud Office bangs on the door and says, okay, where's evidence of your adequate procedure? And you say, well, I had a chat with all the staff 3 months ago to say this Bribery Act's coming in and we've now got a zero-tolerance policy. They'll say, okay, well, where's the policy? You say, well, I told them we've got a zero-tolerance policy. Where is it? Where's the proof that you told the staff? Well, I put my top 2 people who do bookings in Kazakhstan, I put them through a training course. Okay, well, where's the detail of the course you put them through? Where's the course? Where's the timetable of the course they went on? Where's the sign-off from the person who was running the course that they had attended? These are the kind of things that would be looked for if you get the SFO banging on the door. So document everything. It's pretty simple, but it's much more difficult to do 2 years later than doing it at the time. Right, this is a very quick section on assessing bribery risk. The red areas of the world are those which are perceived to be the most corrupt. You can see that they vastly outnumber the yellow and the